Good evening. I'd like to call our special council meeting of Monday, June 15th, 2020 to order at 6 p.m. and welcome members of the public who may be watching us by live webcast this evening, or those who may tune in through a connection to our website after the meeting. And want to welcome my council colleagues, Councillor Rintoul and Councillor Garnett here in the council chamber, and connecting video conference Councillors Duncan, Fallett, Wainwright. Sorry? And Councillor O'Keefe, sorry. And good evening to staff. So I'd like to first give a territorial acknowledgement that we are holding this evening's meeting in the traditional territory of the Wasanich Nation. And in turning to approval of the agenda, I'd first ask Council to consider that we do not currently provide for public participation at our special council meetings in our council procedure bylaw, and ask that during agenda approval to move the agenda with the addition of public participation this evening.
I'll move as amended.
Second.
Any discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I'd now like Council to consider a motion business arising from our agenda approval, and as I mentioned, indicated that our council procedure bylaw does not currently provide for public participation during special council meetings, and like to consider a motion to ask staff to bring a council procedure bylaw amendment to council at a future date to allow public participation at special council meetings at the discretion of the mayor and CAO.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I guess I'm wondering why it would have to be at anybody's discretion. Like procedurally, I guess I'm just wondering, if we have a special council meeting that is about whatever, I'm just wondering why we wouldn't just allow people to participate and comment on whatever is the subject of the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the mayor actually gave me a call earlier to ask me why there isn't public participation routinely at special council meetings. And the thing is that special council meetings are exactly that. There have been special council meetings where there was a need to get council to approve a grant application or something that was really a kind of a housekeeping matter. And a special council meeting would be called with the understanding that some members of council probably couldn't attend, but a quorum could, for the sake of getting the business done. And there have been meetings like that that were literally less than 5 minutes long. And in a situation like that, knowing that some people couldn't make it, and you're only having the meeting to do some housekeeping, public participation really isn't appropriate. The other thing is, we have had occasions where there was a special council meeting on the same day as a regular council meeting. And why would you have public participation twice?
Yeah.
The thing is, there are times when it does make sense to allow public participation, but to make it a routine matter in the bylaw probably isn't the right thing to do. So I suggested to the mayor that it would be appropriate to amend the bylaw to allow it to happen if it was appropriate, but don't make it a routine that always happens. So
Okay,
that's the reason.
That's good. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for sharing that experience and speaking with Mr. Humble today as well. Did you wish to speak to that, Mr. Humble? Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So we will turn to public participation and this evening, and we do have a speaker. I'd like to welcome Mr. John Trelevin, a Sydney resident. And Mr. Trelevin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is related, of course, to the subject on tonight's agenda, which is the most important subject this council has ever or will ever deal with. But before I do that, Mayor Cliff McNeil Smith spoke to our Rotary Club Sydney by the Sea last week and gave us a really inspirational, actually, explanation of how the town as an institution and major other public, quasi-public institutions responded to this COVID crisis. And I'm very well aware from his presentation that when he was on council the first time was when the council kind of updated what the mayor called the book. And then he made our club aware that in 2018, the town called for an audit of the emergency procedures and got a gold star. And then he went through the decision-making process, which put us as a community in as safe a position as we could possibly have been. And I also should say that he did say his first day on the job as mayor, he asked where the book was, and of course it was on the edge of his desk. I want to thank you, and the members of our club want to thank the council and the staff and the others that you reached out to at a time of unprecedented crisis. The only difference between what you were facing and we were facing was the difference between this crisis and an earthquake is the buildings were still standing. Otherwise, this was the big earthquake. And bigger than an earthquake would be because it's completely global. You deserve credit for many reasons, and I mean, council, mayor, and staff. The town of Sydney did what no other community, municipality in Greater Victoria did. It is true that the city of Victoria passed a motion to freeze taxes, have a tax increase of 0 on residences. You did something more important. You reduced the tax burden on businesses by 10% over last year's limit. That was courageous, should have been imitated by every other municipality. The fact that it wasn't is greater tribute to the courage that you showed. And let me say it one more time. Those businesses don't pay the tax. Their customers do. And at the moment, the customer count is down. Where do they get the money to pay those taxes? So I do want to congratulate you for having a plan in place that was broadly understood within the town hall and public agencies and had been audited by outside experts, and you were ready to go. Now we come to where we are at the moment. We're still in the crisis, but we're starting to emerge. The analogy I use is very simple. A patient who's suffering from COVID is taken into the hospital. They get worse, they're put in the ICU. They get worse and they have to go on a ventilator. That's a very difficult decision for the doctors to make, but if your blood oxygen level goes down, you have no choice. Happily, in this case, the patient survives for the 3 or 4 weeks and they begin to recover. The next most dangerous time for that patient is when they are taken off the ventilator. All 3 levels of government put the private sector on the ventilator for public health reasons when they put in place not social distancing, but isolation and really instructing people to stay home. There was no choice. And both the individuals bore the price, and so did the businesses. Now, your plan is coming along at a time when you've got to revive the patient. This has never been done. Nobody knows what to do. The federal government doesn't know. The provincial government doesn't know. There are no experts here. And unlike your emergency plan, which provided a pathway to respond to the crisis, there is no strategic plan and cannot be for revival. It has never been done. We've never put the economy into coma, and we've never had to take it out. Three things to keep in mind for those of you, and we should all be involved, but anyway, governments cannot create jobs. Your role in the town of Sydney is critical to job creation, as is the province and the federal government. But all you can do is create programs, raise taxes, hire people. When the taxes disappear, the jobs go. Businesses don't create taxes. Never in the history of a business did the board of directors tell the president to go hire people. Only customers create jobs. And we are running an economy now in which customers are held away from the marketplace. Whatever plans, whatever concept, whatever approach is taken to revive the economy of Sydney, it's got to be focused on building customer confidence in the businesses. And no one has written a book on this. So we're going to have to be, we were clearly, successfully process-driven at the early stages of this crisis, and that's why we're in reasonably good shape today. But getting out of it is going to require far more judgment than process. The mayor of Sydney, I don't have to tell you, runs an iconic business on Beacon Avenue in a business that's been challenged by technology and market disruption for years. And I don't know how Cliff continues to look as young as he does. We are in great shape to recover from this crisis by having Cliff as mayor. I mean, in my view, if you didn't have somebody of his caliber as the chief magistrate of this town, you'd have to find somebody who would be equally capable to guide the whole effort. So as a taxpayer in Sydney, I'm hoping that whatever decision you take as a council makes it very clear that it is his judgment, and it is the judgment of people in the private sector that will carry the day, because there is no other place to find the experience that we need to get the patient off the iron lung. So I'm, as a taxpayer, grateful for all the decisions as councillors and senior staff and working staff in Sydney have taken over the years to get us to where we are. My only concern is that going forward, it's not about process. It's about judgment and experimentation. And let us keep in mind, we cannot revive the economy of Sydney without our neighbors. And in fact, Canada cannot revive the economy without doing something pretty profound to recognize that half of our GDP is generated by international trade. Where is it to come from? So I would strongly suggest, I mean, I see this as an interesting process, that the paper that the staff has produced, but I would strongly suggest that this is the moment to reach out to the business owners, and not just in Sydney. Fortunately, you are a member of SIP. As you know, they're carrying on a region-wide effort. And I know that you've got SIP included here. Well, Dallas Gizlanson, among others, knows the economy of Sydney very well. It's customers that create jobs. It's entrepreneurs and risk takers who figure out a way to solve a problem for a customer that brings them into the store. And as a consequence of them being in business, they collect taxes for the town of Sydney, the province of British Columbia, and the federal government. No one has an answer here, but lots of people in this community, and including, of course, you on council, have the judgment to make this work. I encourage you to reach out, Zoom works, to as broad a range of people in this community who have risked their income, their family's income, by investing in the community for years. And take a very careful look at the impact of policies adopted by neighboring municipalities, which will either help or hinder the efforts. Again, congratulations on everyone involved in bringing the town of Sydney and to where we are today. But going forward, I would suggest that you've got to have a judgment-driven process rather than a committee-driven process, if I can put it that way. And one other small thing, in where you brought the town to this point, the federal government was very important. The province was very important with all the measures they put in place. And it is true, as the mayor said, when you debated the tax rebate or the tax decrease, that the town can only do so much, but this we have to do. In reviving the town, it is you that are on the front lines. The most important level of government for any business is the municipality. You're in first place. The province, of course, will have resources, and the federal government will have resources, but it's the reverse of the role, actually, that you have played today. I thank you for the opportunity. Again, profound thanks for everything that has happened to get us to this stage. But I do think in going forward, you've got to reach out to the business community for judgment. And one other thing I have to say.
Okay, Mr. Chair Levin.
In the documentation, there are 4 strategic areas of work, right? The economy, cultural, community, and being prepared for COVID-19 waves. Oh, don't even think about that. If we get into the second wave, by the way, the United States today almost recorded the peak in COVID. I have to say, if we don't successfully revive the economy, the other 3 strategic elements will fail. The economy has to be the first to get the judgment so that we can then have the resources to do what we need to do for the other elements of society. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations and thanks for everything you've done.
Thanks for coming before council tonight, Mr. Trelevin. I appreciate it. That'll bring public participation to a close, and I'd like to turn to item 4A, our main business this evening, the transition from Emergency Operations Center, EOC, to a long-term recovery structure. We have a report from staff dated June 12th, and I'd like ask Mr. Humble to introduce it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to briefly summarize. I think the EOC Director, Fire Chief Mickelson's done an excellent job. It's a very comprehensive report that he's provided to council on a way forward with respect to the recovery phase. And he's done so on relatively short notice, obviously understanding that this is a critical item and wanting it to get it before council for their consideration. Chief Mickelson, as the EOC Director, has previously alluded on a number of occasions when asked the question, when would we look at potentially demobilizing the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC? The response has always been from Chief Mickelson, basically when we are complete with the emergency response phase is when we'll really start looking at wrapping up the EOC. So as we begin to see what may be deemed the close of the emergency response phase, and again the trigger for demobilizing the EOC, we see things such as the ending or the closing of the critical supply chain truck stop at the Mary Winspear Centre as being one. We see now the opening of our playgrounds as another. As been alluded previously, we're moving towards the demobilization of the shower facilities and the closing of the potential shower facilities at Iroquois Park for our vulnerable, unsheltered population, and moving towards that towards the end of the month. So again, these are all signs that we're moving out of the emergency response phase towards now what may be deemed the focused recovery phase. Chief Mickelson also indicates in his report that as we move to the recovery phase and out of the response phase, there is no longer a need for what is deemed the incident command structure, as is typical under an emergency response framework as outlined by Emergency Management BC, and that's indicated in the report. We're extremely fortunate, and it's been very beneficial having established a formalized recovery structure within our EOC from the outset. And again, this has been indicated time and time again, how beneficial it has been having the involvement of the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce, Denny Warner, physically attending the EOC and involved in the response and the recovery phase, as well as the remote work of the Executive Director of the SBIA, Morgan Shaw. So we are now looking, however, to a transition to a full recovery phase, and in doing so, we are proposing a structure framework that provides, in our opinion, the best possible opportunity for success as we move into a full recovery phase. One that we feel best suits the size and the scale of our community and the strong and active organizational presence that exists in the many varied sectors within our community. Accordingly, having reviewed the options, we are of the opinion that the best option to advance our full recovery phase is through the establishment of a recovery task force that is ultimately led by Council as the policy group, while still maintaining critical staff support with a part-time recovery director, as well as assistance from other staff, in particular the Fire and Emergency Management Office Services Coordinator, Ms. Donna Barner. So key to this is the establishment of a select committee of council that would be formed as a recovery task force. The details of the structure and the makeup of the task force are provided to council for your review and consideration, as well as a more detailed terms of reference. And myself and Chief Mickelson would be pleased to answer any questions that council may have regarding the staff report or the details associated with the proposed terms of reference. And I'll just ask Chief Mickelson if he has anything to add with respect to the summary.
No, I have nothing to add. That was a very comprehensive review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I will turn to council if you have specific questions of anything in the staff report, but would look for council to make a motion before we begin discussion on the merits of the recommendation. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just looking at the dependent upon COVID-19 case counts remaining within the established thresholds. Is this a subjective number kind of based on where potential outbreaks might occur and how fast they're spreading, or is this kind of a threshold that's being handed down from the province?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Duncan, that would be guided by the Provincial Health Officer. Ultimately, we'll follow their lead. But again, if case counts get to a point where we're not planking the curve or continuing to go in the right direction, this phased approach is very positive now, but we have to remain cognizant that it can be reversed as well if things don't go as well as they are currently. So it's basically just a placeholder statement to remind us that as well as we're doing, we need to remain vigilant, and we could go backwards as well.
All right, thank you. So it's not that they're looking for, oh, if we hit above 20 a day or something, they're just monitoring the direction.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Fallett.
Yes, thank you. So one of the questions I have is under the financial implications. It's talking about that existing, it's anticipated that existing staff will assume the resulting additional workload. We're also going into our summer period, and as we know, we're going to have staff on vacation. So we're already working with reduced staff, and yet we're allocating staff to do half-time on this program. How is that being juggled? I mean, we're looking at the next 2 to 3 months, the beginning of this recovery phase, important program, and we've got reduced staff in the town hall.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallot. Yeah, indeed, it does present a bit of a challenge. There's no question about it. We have been currently, making our way through this with reduced staff, given the level of staff that have been having to attend the EOC. So with the demobilization of the EOC, we will be getting some staff back to regular operations. So that'll provide some level of offset. But again, this is one of the reasons why we're recommending this structure, to be quite honest, with respect to an opportunity for organizational involvement to look at some of the elements and including implementation. So again, it's intended that the task force will be I anticipate a bit of a roll up your sleeves committee, and I think with that as an offset, we'll be able to get through the summer months for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I may, through the mayor to staff, maybe for some context with regard to the process at arriving, the composition that's suggested here, as related to the current Economic Advisory Committee, which the town has. Could you just speak to how this role differs? I recognize there's a broader context here for the terms of reference that are proposed, but at our last council meeting, we referred to the EAC, requesting them to provide suggestions to council on actions and initiatives to support economic recovery from the pandemic, and identified in the purpose under the draft terms of reference for economic recovery and resiliency, we would be asking this new committee to make recommendations regarding the design and implementation of initiatives, activities, and programs that support reinvigorating our community, support reinvigorating our local economy throughout the COVID-19 pandemic recovery phase. So there's some commonality there, albeit the terms of reference as proposed are broader, and I appreciate some of the thought process and context that go into the approach that's been taken here.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. I'll start it off, and maybe Chief Mickelson might want to voice his perspective as well. Yeah, I mean, I think the intent here was to make sure that the list of possible organizations associated with the task force was broad enough and beyond just the economic sector. So we're getting into obviously community culture as well when we start including organizations like CAG as an example, and the Mary Winspear Center. And when we start talking about community resiliency and moving beyond, we also include other organizations or suggested organizations such as our First Nations neighbours through the WSÁNEĆ Leadership Council and the Sydney Community Association as well, which don't have representation on the Economic Advisory Committee. In terms of the Economic Advisory Committee itself, I appreciate the resolution from the last council that did seek to reinstate the EAC. I think the resolution was that the EAC sort of share their personal experiences and perspectives regarding the impacts associated with COVID, and also look at their individual sectors and then look at potential actions or initiatives that might be considered. And I think the idea there is to report back to council on those. Certainly it's up to the council as the policy group, but I would anticipate that that be undertaken by the EAC, that they do report back to council. Council has an opportunity to review those and then certainly forward any of those perspectives on to the task force if it is ultimately established. There also will be, of course, the potential for EAC representation on the task force itself. So I hope that helps. But did you have anything to add, Chief Mickelson?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, to Councillor Rintoul, exactly as Mr. Humble articulated, obviously it's entirely up to the policy group in respect to how the reporting goes, whether it's from the EAC or the Recovery Steering Committee. But from a process perspective and looking at an emergency management hierarchy that's established and recognized, the preference would be that an EAC member has a seat on the Recovery Steering Committee, and obviously that member would likely figure prominently on the economic recovery and resiliency element under that element's kind of auspices, and that the EAC would report to the steering committee, or the steering committee would report up through the recovery director to the policy group, and that would lessen the likelihood of a duplication or potential mixed messaging. That would just be my preference and would be most consistent with established recovery policies versus kind of having two separate entities trying to do the same thing at the same time.
Councillor Rintoul, a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much to staff for the clarification. I do have somewhat concern, and perhaps Ambassador Trelevin's comments give me pause, for thought further on this, and that is just around the efficiency behind having two committees with some overlap and some staff time required and some council time involved as well. It's good to get a lot of feedback options. I'm really pleased to see the EAC reconvening because a number of those business owners undoubtedly are going to have some really positive suggestions for council's consideration. And I'm comfortable supporting the process that's here, but I do want to just state my reservation that we be very cautious about the efficiency, the use of not just staff time, frankly, but volunteers' time to provide input. And I do note that the EAC has, from the 12 participant groups that are recommended, 6 of them already participate in the EAC, including West Sydney representation, among others. And so let's be cognizant of that, and let's be respectful of the input that we're seeing from all of these volunteer groups, and ensure that the EAC's voice continues to be heard through this new mechanism. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for raising that. EAC is not addressed specifically in the 3 recommendations, so I am comfortable with Councillor asking questions or making comment with regards to this, but we will be slowly turning to actually recommendations, and we could have a recommendation with regards to EAC in addition to the 3 that are made, or however we choose to proceed. But I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright first and then to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm following the same kind of I think thought process that my colleague Councillor Rintoul is in his questions, and I guess I'm wondering whether obviously staff have considered a couple of different structures, but it looks like we could have potentially gone with a structure where there was an economic task force, a cultural task force, a community task force, and they would each come up with their recommendations, actions, whatever, and pass them up to the policy group, who are the ones that decide on priorities of the various actions, how the resources get split among the things, and so on. So that looked like it would be a reasonable structure. Obviously, you would need staff to actually implement whatever the plan is that comes out of it. So I can see the position of staff support to that. But I guess I'm wondering, did staff consider a structure that did not have a steering committee, but would have separate call them subcommittees, if you wish, for the different sectors that are identified in the ABCD in the report, and just have everything come up to council?
Yes.
Like, why is that not appropriate?
So, through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, yes, we did look at various structures like that. Many of those structures followed the incident command hierarchy, or very similar to an EOC, which were very staff intensive to kind of manage and facilitate a lot of those individual task forces. We arrived at this structure, I arrived at this structure primarily, it basically provides for the community involvement that obviously we need, and we definitely need to leverage the knowledge and a lot of the understanding of what's going on with the business community in Sydney, so it provides for that. And through the recovery director, it provides them, the recovery director is best looked at as a project manager. So a lot of, we only have a limited capacity, and as Councillor Rintoul has alluded to, and I understand very well, the volunteers' time as well as staff time is extremely valuable. So we need somebody at the helm or as an intermediary to act as a focusing person to really say, we can only do so much, and we only have so much time, and we need to focus on these deliverables and to get them done under a certain time, and then report back to the policy group, which we made it very clear, and the policy group made it very clear that obviously that they wanted to be in function the policy group and understand what's going on. So there, as Mr. Trelevin said, there isn't a playbook for this, but this recovery structure is the one that we could identify that is established, is recognized within British Columbia, and best fits our circumstances. That's not to say it's not a malleable document and can't be altered in some ways, but this is one that we can reasonably take on and ensure there's lots of stakeholder engagement from our business community and still maximize our staff time effectively. Again, it's kind of right-sized for us in this time and in this environment.
Thank you. Mr. Humble, you have a follow-up?
Just to follow up, thank you. I think the other recognition is that the thought here is that, and again, picking up on some of the excellent points that were made by Mr. Trelevin, that I guess economic recovery is paramount, and there's a lot of overlap between the economic recovery and the cultural recovery and the community recovery overall. And so the opportunity to have the potential synergies that are developed by having a task force that is broad in nature and where everyone can hear each other's discussion on the various elements and the level of overlap there, I think it provides that added value. And as opposed to having almost individual silos and then coming together with recommendations. So I think the thought here is that this provides a more comprehensive and broader approach that will provide more benefit as well.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe in a moment, and then I'd like to speak next after Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So we're still on questions, not discussion, right?
Yes, please. Yes, we have no motion on the floor, so please discussion and...
Yeah, okay, so just a little bit more clarity from staff in regards to the consultant that we hired for a couple of months, and they came up with a long list of proposed actions. And I understand from staff that is my understanding correct that...
Councillor okay. Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, your volume just skyrocketed for a moment there and then seemed to come back to normal.
Oh, sorry to blow you away. Okay, I'll try again. Yeah, so just about the various actions that the consultant came up with, that those would be, I presume, reviewed by the steering committee. And I'm also wondering, are there any plans for the consultant to, aside from preparing a list of things that could be done? Are they actually going to do any of those things as part of their recovery?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, you're correct. The list that was provided by the consultant was obviously wide and rather expansive, and that was noted by council. I recollect at a previous meeting, and a lot of those various things, they included contact tracing and a whole number of things that really depended upon where the virus and our response and the circumstances determined. So it was a bit of a shotgun approach that provided us with a bunch of potential action items to do depending on kind of the course of the response and how well we did. So fortunately, based on where we are now, there's a number of those things that we're not going to have to do or won't have to contemplate at this time, which I'm quite happy. There are some that definitely remain viable on the table, and I would very much quite confident that the recovery director with the steering committee would review those, and again, as part of the triaging process of what's going to provide the most value, what's going to really be a focusing tool for economic recovery, and then they'll bring that forward to the policy group for implementation and spending time on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And my comment is that I think by virtue of having the EAC in place, that it's additional horsepower to the significant challenge we have of economic recovery. And I won't speak to the task force because we should wait for motions on that. But having the various many sector representatives on that committee, I think will bring additional resource, additional benefit to the overall process of recovery, and given the significance of the economic aspect. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, I was just wondering, have we reached out to the Wasanich Leadership Council before we go forward with this, or is this going to be something we approach them with after if we take that path?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, yeah, we didn't deem it appropriate to reach out in advance before having the council discussion on the committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'll save the remainder of my discussion till the discussion time, but I guess first off, I don't see any representatives here from CR Fair or the Sanders Peninsula Agricultural Committee. We don't have anything about food and food security in here, which I would have thought would be a key component of community resiliency. Are we accessing those resources through a different channel, maybe through the CRD, or was there a reason they were not included?
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, we did discuss it, and again, we have identified that, again, this is a malleable document, and again, as the policy group, if the components of the steering committee would to be expanded, that would be something we'd be happy to look at and potentially add if we're required to.
Thank you. And I'll just add, and I think council is aware that once we have recommendations, we can certainly talk about the composition of the task force with regards to community representation, different organizations, as well as the terms of reference. Okay, seeing no further questions, I'll leave it to council to move forward with recommendations as they see fit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm inclined to move the first two recommendations. I think there may be more discussion on the third, and so I'll proceed on that basis. Moving recommendation number one, that council sees merit in adopting a long-term recovery structure led by the senior manager of current planning and supported by the fire department and the emergency management office services coordinator, which will report directly to the policy group, and that a select committee be established to support, inform, and assist the recovery director in identifying projects focusing on economic and cultural recovery in the town.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I agree that it's time to stand down the EOC and start turning our attention to recovery efforts. We definitely need a recovery strategy, but I'm concerned that the proposed structure would actually result in more duplication of effort, unnecessary bureaucracy and process, and impact our ability to be nimble and responsive. Some of the specific things I have is, so as we've mentioned already, we already have established committees and groups that we can tap into without creating another structure. So as Councillor Wainwright said, we could broaden the terms or make more specific the terms of reference for the EAC. We've got the CA group who covers off the cultural component very well. We could have a third thing for community groups, or what we could do is just have a special council meeting specifically focused on recovery and invite any community groups that would like to provide input into our recovery planning. We could give them that opportunity. I guess what I'm worried about is about getting back to the EAC again. It's been noted that there's already duplication of, there's a number of people who were on EAC that would be on the task force. And so it just seems unnecessary for me, for those people to convene with EAC, have a meeting, and then have another meeting with, you know, with the task force to discuss the same things. And as been mentioned, I think we have to be mindful of the time commitment for those people who volunteer. So for that reason, I'm not particularly supportive of that particular structure. In regards to the comment about, you know, having this task force would minimize mixed messaging, I'm not exactly sure what is meant by that in this context, but it leaves me with the feeling that any recommendations or ideas that come from the EAC would be vetted or filtered by the task force first. And I guess my preference is we've got a whole group of people that represent most of the industrial sectors of our economy involved in the EAC, and I really want to hear from them directly without it having to be filtered by somebody else. In regards to the culture recovery, same thing, same kind of points in regards to the CAG. Moving on to just a second point, in terms of the Fire and Emergency Management Office Services Coordinator being allocated to the task force, I'm not in favor of that at this time for a couple of reasons, a few reasons. So first of all, we don't know what our recovery plan is going to look like, what it might cost, and what expertise will be required. So I'm not in favor of allocating resources for a position without knowing whether that is the best allocation of our resources. So, for example, if once we look at all the options and things that we might want to do, we might decide, for example, that we want to create a new business portal on the website. Or we might decide that we want to make Sydney more accessible or bike friendly. So depending on what council decides to do, and then look at what are the resources going to be required to do that, who is in the best position to oversee that. So I would see the IT department, you know, working on the website, the engineering and planning department, say, working on other things. So I think before we allocate resources and a person to a specific position, I think we need to look at what are our needs and who is best and who has the expertise to do what needs to be done. I guess I'll also just throw in that, you know, I don't think, like, I think it's a good idea to, you know, we need to look at what all the different sectors are doing. But again, and it's been pointed out that the town doesn't need to be involved in everything. And the SBIA, the chamber, themselves. A lot of businesses are already starting to recover. And so I guess what I'd be more interested in is I want to hear directly from the EAC. I want to hear directly from CA and from other community groups, and that council is whether we're the task force, and if it means that we have to throw in an extra meeting to review all of this information, I see it like a little mini strategic planning session. So I've got some other comments, but I'll leave it there for now to let others jump in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll say I'm uncomfortable about some of the aspects of the recovery structure, the way it's laid out. And one of the things I'm uncomfortable about is the steering committee reporting to the recovery director, reporting to the policy group. And I can see the need for somebody to play that coordinating role, to monitor the implementation of whatever recovery plan we come up with, and make sure about accountability of any funding we're putting into it, and making sure things don't fall through the cracks and so on. But I'm not expecting that I don't think there's going to be a single recovery plan for the entire community that everyone buys into. So for example, the SBIA has already started recovery activities, and I cannot imagine us telling them, stop what you're doing, you should be doing this instead. And their business interests that have that deal, for example, with overseas export markets, and maybe the issues they're having are entirely about supply chains and transportation. They'll be doing what's appropriate to them, and we won't be able to say, no, you should be doing this instead, nor will we be saying, no, you have to do it through our structure and report to our recovery director. Like, the world is not going to work like that. So I can see us trying to coordinate things. I can also see us trying to initiate and partner with people. I can see us funding things as well, but I can't see everything funneling through a single director. And like that structure, I just see potential problems with that. I'm also having some concerns about the steering committee having to pull everything together, come up with a plan, and essentially toss it up to council looking for approval. Because you're going to get a series of actions and priorities coming out of the economic team, and there'll be funding needed for some of those. And you're going to have a series of actions and priorities coming out of the cultural team, and funding needs for those. And in fact, there's probably quite a bit of overlap between those two teams. Fine. But at the end of the day, when it comes up to the steering committee level, you're going to have essentially a wish list coming out of the economic sector, a wish list coming out of the cultural one, a wish list coming out of the community side, and the steering committee would be tasked with figure out the priorities and which ones are like, we have limited resources. Here's the short list in order that we think council should approve it. Well, that actually is the role of the policy group. And I have to say, while I'm definitely open to advice and suggestions, I don't want to delegate that responsibility to another committee. Like, I don't want to have the recommendations coming out of the economic team filtered so that I don't see the ones that didn't make the cut. that is the role of the policy group. So, as I say, these are elements that I'm finding uncomfortable with this. And, well, I guess I'd like to hear what the rest of my colleagues think, and I may weigh in some more later.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fellett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm hearing some common sense coming from my colleagues, and I reflect back to during the response time with COVID, and not just for Sydney, but I'm thinking the larger picture of the province and also the country. And we saw how quickly and how responsive our governments, our agencies were in looking, what are the needs in the community, and they found a way to make things happen. We didn't get caught up in bureaucracy. As Councillor O'Keefe talked about being nimble and bureaucracy, and Councillor Wainwright also referred to multi-layered structures. And I think there is a simplicity that we are missing in this plan. And I don't want to be the one to tell our community, this is how you should be doing things. They're in business to be in business, and they know what works for their business. We should be hearing from them, and as I said at the last council meeting, and then how can we make things happen for you? They're the experts in that, and the various members in these groups that we've looked at, they're the experts. How can we find a smoother and more efficient manner of collecting the thoughts and the needs, and how do we make that happen? So for me, I would like to stay with something a whole lot more simple than what I'm seeing presented this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For a second there, when Councillor Fallett said she was hearing common sense from her colleagues, I thought she was making, she was going to criticize. I agree also with what my colleagues have said. As I was looking at the chart and thinking about the steering committee and thinking about what the town's role is, what government role is, and an article I'd read it was in the Tyee on Thursday about the foundational economy, and about supporting the foundational economy, because those are the businesses where the customers, they never went away. Sometimes they were prevented from going if it was a hairdresser or something like that, but the needs don't disappear. The grocery stores kept hopping. You're never going to not need somebody to stock your grocery shelves. We found out due to this pandemic which jobs are actually the important jobs and which are the jobs that might be being ballyhooed to the rooftops about the great stuff they're going to bring if we can attract that business to stay here instead of somewhere else. But really, it's the people who are working in your town and living in your town that are not just the economic recovery, but they are the cultural recovery, because they are, as so many of our downtown businesses are, the ones that help participate in our community events. They're the ones that you go to when you want donations for your funding drive, and those things are very inseparable. But when it comes to what our town has, I felt we need that representation. I believe one of the staff brought it up, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing wrong here, but that part of the reason for needing that staff filter was to kind of bring in what was possible within, town's resources and within our budgets and within what we are actually able to do. And I thought that seemed actually to be a role that was almost equal on the steering committee rather than in a director position, that these are the people who are bringing the experience of what we actually have in terms of capital available, of staffing available, in terms of the bylaws and policies that are already in place. What is kind of the ground rules, ground terrain that we're looking at when people are looking for how flexible and how fast can we be at changing things. And it's kind of an equal seat, and it is definitely a voice that needs to be there at that table, and informing what a task force might come up with that then goes to the recovery group for sure. But I'm not sure if in this particular position, it needs to be one that that all of that is filtered through. It's an extra seat at the table, but it's not necessarily the filter through which it should all be shown. And I guess further to that was, I mean, my comments before about we have no representation currently as is conceived from, I think, what some of those foundational economy components are, I guess we probably have grocery stores represented in, the chamber and things like that, but really getting at the meat of the people who are bringing goods into our economy, and what they will be needing, what we need for food supplies and things like that, which some of that might also go into some of our other emergency response organizations. I know a few meetings ago, Chief Mickelson was speaking about starting up building neighborhood pods for responses. Mostly that would, earthquake and things like that, things that has already been started to be put in place. And I thought, this was the kind of thing that we'd be looking at, and about what kind of intrinsic resource do we have in our community for people to actually meet their needs within our community. What is how strong is our local economy and the resilience to a possible second wave and further deterioration of our global supply chains? And I think that's going to be very foundational going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points, if I may, for my council colleagues to consider. I concur. I mean, one of my concerns is this a level of bureaucracy we're creating that may not lead to as expeditious responses as we intend. And so, to an extent, my earlier comments around, for example, the role of the EAC were more geared to how can the EAC complement this structure. I had not envisioned, as Councillor Keith had stated, that there'd be the possibility of the EAC reporting to the steering committee, as opposed to, according to the terms of reference, the EAC continuing to report directly to council. So I think that's my understanding, that's my preference, and of course the EAC's terms of reference are fairly clear. The EAC reports to council, and so we could still see some expeditious input from the EAC through that mechanism. One thing I just don't want to lose sight of is that the structure that's been recommended in this report is an established structure and is in keeping with recovery planning intent that has been recommended to us from staff who are trained in this area, referring in particular, if I may, to Chief Mickelson. And so the idea of the efficiency that they've commented on for staff resources to deal with, by and large, one steering committee versus activating CAG, the EAC, reaching out to our neighboring municipalities for input, as we know that they are certainly customers on our main street, looking for sort of that sort of input so broadly is probably less efficient than working with this one group. Where I was probably going to see some challenge with the report tonight was around the composition of the steering committee, which is why I moved the first two recommendations and not the third yet, figuring that we'd have a more fulsome discussion there on this item. So I would just like my council colleagues to pause and give a little thought about whether or not activating a number of miscellaneous committees with a multiple of staff members involved, with a multiple number of councillors involved, is as efficient as seeing this one group reporting, whether it's through the director, to the policy group, I think is somewhat immaterial. There may be some efficiencies there in this structure that we haven't discussed at this point. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett? I'll speak for a first time, if I might, and then I'll turn to second speakers, and first with Councillor O'Keefe. And there's been a number of points raised, and I appreciate the conversation. And one of them is with regards to efficiency, which Councillor Rintoul has spoken to as well. And I'll draw attention that the provincial government and the federal government have formed task forces very much like this. In fact, I met a member of the Premier's task force on recovery over the weekend. He's one of 9 members, and basically they have different sectors of society represented, not just sectors of the economy, but sectors of society, including business, the economic sector, and quite frankly, they are a filter to a degree, because otherwise you would have every group going directly. Not that individual groups aren't going directly to their respective ministries in the provincial government, but in terms of the provincial government determining how they're going to spend their $1.5 billion that they've allocated to stimulus and other recovery measures, they see this as an efficient, an effective way to bring ideas forward to their cabinet, to their government. Similarly, on a regional basis, the Capital Regional basis, CIP has established a task force where, again, it has representation from the different areas of society. It has nonprofits, it has private business, it has education, it has transportation, and it is bringing those together. They have formed subcommittees, as I've reported out to council, and they fortunately have the resource or the horsepower of the volunteers to be able to form that committee structure. I don't think a municipality of our size would actually have the resource to create 3 or 4 separate committees or subcommittees within the committee. I did speak earlier that that we do have the EAC in place, but again, with regards to efficiency, we saw fit to form the EAC as a group of representatives from the different economic sectors in our community, and quite frankly, they will filter ideas about what goes on in their community. We won't hear every idea that they have. We could ask for a comprehensive report, but they will, amongst them, bring forward a group of priorities, and council will still have decisions to make in terms of whether it chooses to bring those forward or not. So I don't think it's a bypass to council's responsibility as a policy group. I think a task force is an efficient way, as the provincial government, as the regional government, or as the regional Capital Regional District is doing. So that's a note on efficiency. With regards to CEAG, CEAG is not a creation of the town of Sydney. It doesn't report to the town of Sydney. It's a group that is formed as part of the BIA. It was part of the agreement when the BIA was created, but the CEAG group doesn't report to council, and we wouldn't be expecting them to be bringing reports for our discussion and our deliberation in terms of what they do in the cultural community. And so I see having a member of a representative from that body, while that group will be doing things, having that as part of this task force. I'll leave it there and turn to first-time speaker Councillor Garnett, and then turn to second-time speaker Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had many of the same reservations that have been brought up by other councillors, so I'm not going to delve into them. But upon reflection, my issue of if I had any concerns about filtering through the recovery director, the fact that the EAC reports directly to us, and many of the members of this committee already represented on the EAC, gives me a little more comfort in that, knowing that I would have a better understanding of what they're seeking to go forward with in terms of recovery. So that's pretty much the only comment I have, because I'm not going to echo what others have said. So thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Let's see, first of all, just getting back on the efficiency thing. So I'm still not buying or sold on the fact that the task force will make things more efficient. And the reason is so EAC is already going to be meeting anyways. So whether, so having a task force means they're going to have to meet more often. So they're going to have to meet as EAC, then those people are going to have to come back to the task force again. And then they're going to have to go back to their EAC to report on what the task force told them. In regards to CAG, yes, they're not one of the town's listed committees, but they are funded by the town. The town provides the funding to the SBIA to run that committee. So I feel quite comfortable going to CAG to say, here's what we would like your feedback on, and provide them with the information that that we've outlined in terms of reference, perhaps for them. So I'm quite comfortable, and I can't imagine that CAG would say, no, we don't want to participate in recovery. I think they would welcome that opportunity. So I don't see that as an obstacle. Yeah, and yes, maybe it's true that, well, it is true that the federal government, the provincial government has task force, but we're a small town. I think we need to be, a bit more realistic in terms of our resources. And I don't see that it's going to be more efficient to have a committee to tell us information that we can get directly from other sources. That's my thing about efficiency. In regards to the reporting structure, and what I think is going to come out of this is we're probably going to be doing some things that maybe we should have done before, but we hadn't. And so it's been mentioned, and I agree that the economic aspect of this is probably the most important impact that this has had in our community. And sadly, we've been in council for almost, a year and a half, and we still do not have an economic strategy for the town. And so I think what COVID is forcing us to do is now we're going to have to start looking at some things, and perhaps in how we support the community better in terms of business retention and maybe expansion and that sort of thing. So I think that's a good thing that the pandemic is nudging us in that direction. So leading into how that's related to reporting structure, it seems to me that whatever actions we decide to take, there's going to be impacts on other departments, on engineering or IT or planning, whatever the case may be. And the recovery director really, under the current format, has no authority to direct other departments to do things. So I see a better model that council gets the information directly from EAC or CAG or other community groups. We make decisions on what the priorities or the activities are going to be, and we communicate that to the CAO to say, here's what we want to do. That's our normal way of operating, so I don't see why that has to change. And then the CAO can have a recovery director to assist in helping to implement some of those things that can't already be handled with existing staff in planning or engineering already. There's also been some reference to that, well, we should adopt this structure because this is something that is recognized by the BC Emergency Planning Organization. Well, yeah, it is, but it's really just one way of doing things, and it's not the way that we have to operate. So if you look, I've been sitting in on the BC Economic Development webinars for the last 2 months on a weekly basis and looking at what other communities are doing. Some of them have task force set up, but they're not necessarily following what's in the BC Provincial Emergency Planning Guidelines in terms of recovery. So yes, that's out there, but I don't think it's necessarily something that we have to do just for that reason. I think we need to look at what makes sense for us in our community. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Councillor Duncan. And then Councillor Wainwright.
Yeah, I got it. Well, listening to Councillor O'Keefe, I feel she brought up 2 points that were actually, I suppose, counterpoints that would be arguments actually in favor of this structure that I had been thinking about earlier, is that the fact that our town did not actually have a staff member, we did not have a town-based, a government-based economic director position, and that it was just the EAC, and it was, you know, pulled from the community rather than somebody on staff who was dedicated to that, has been a critique in the past. That we didn't have somebody allocated specifically to economic development. And this is, I guess, recovery. It's not entirely the same, but it's similar. And so in this case, Ms. Verhagen would be in some ways actually finally filling that position that we had been criticized for not having before, in a different way. And so I feel like this is a little bit of a case of where we're going to get it. We got it from both sides here, where we didn't have somebody who was dedicated from the town to directing that. It was shown that it was seen as that we weren't taking it seriously enough. And now that we do have somebody dedicated from the town, we're coming at it as though that's too inefficient. So I could see perhaps why staff might be confused with policies, with the policy direction we've given so far. Oh no, I've forgotten my second point. I'll have to come back to it, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, we
thank
had
you.
Councillor Wainwright next.
Okay, yeah, just a point of clarity after hearing Councillor Duncan. I wasn't suggesting that we shouldn't have a recovery director. I do think we should have one. I think it's good to have somebody focused on these activities because we haven't had that focus in the past. So I agree with having that position. What I just didn't agree with was the reporting structure. That what I would rather see is that council information comes to council. We make the decisions about what is going to be in our recovery plan. That gets handed off to the CAO, and then the CAO is the one to decide, okay, out of all these things that council wants to do, this kind of relates more to planning, and we were working on that anyways, whether it's active transportation or whatever. Here's something for engineering, and here's some other things that we need somebody else, things that are falling between the cracks that we'll need some special attention to. And so that's where I see that recovery director adding value, but that they would report to the CEO. So just want to clarify that.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think I like the suggestion that Councillor O'Keefe has just made, that that the recovery director should actually be reporting to the CAO. And if we're going to have a steering committee, it would report directly to the policy group. And the org chart sort of structure that's in the staff report, I'm not comfortable with and would prefer to see that kind of change. One of the things I'm also thinking about is the time frame for this, and that's also influencing my lack of comfort with this, because the recovery from this pandemic is likely to be quite extended, particularly for the hospitality tourism sectors, where the recovery from the downturn in 2008 took a while. This is a more substantial impact. Maybe we will have a rapider recovery of some sectors, but I don't think we expect that. So whatever structure we're looking at for a recovery plan, is likely something we're going to be running for at least a couple of years. And probably it'll be in phases. There'll be some aspects that will recover more quickly, and there'll be others that'll be quite a bit more slow. So I'm kind of thinking in terms of it would be good to have a structure that is closer to the way we normally do things, so that the transition between the all hands on deck recovery that we're going into now versus the couple of years from now, it's focused on these sectors and not like the full all hands on deck. And I think, for example, about the Mayor's Downtown Revitalization Task Force that came up with their recovery plan and the various action items and stuff, and it lasted a while, but quite a lot of the stuff in the plan never got implemented, and it didn't survive the transition to the normal way of doing things. Many of the items that are in the plan remain good ideas, just not implemented. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable going down the task force route for something we expect to be quite long-term. As far as the efficiency side goes, I can see that when you have the incident command system type of structure, it is efficient. I mean, that's what it's for. If we really wanted to be efficient, we try to flatten this structure, and maybe the steering committee would be the policy group plus some additional people meeting as a task force. And you could be pretty confident that what came out of that would have the endorsement of the policy group, typically. You don't have any risk of steering committee came up with this, it went up to the policy group didn't like it, they sent it back down. Again, so I remain uncomfortable with what's being proposed. And with respect to the effort involved and the efficiency of having multiple committees, well, we've already got the EAC. They're going to be meeting anyway. Asking them to do some defined tasks is going to be compatible with them doing other stuff too. I don't really see why, like, we're not even creating a committee, it's there. CAG, yeah, it's not our committee, but it looks pretty close to what we'd want for the cultural recovery thing. I imagine if we asked the BIA if it was okay for us to refer some tasks to them and get them to do them, that the BIA is probably going to be agreeable. Where it already exists, it's got a membership, it could get up and running quickly, it's got established communication lines, it's got good overlap with the EAC. I don't see that as being a lot of additional effort, and CAG will continue to meet to do the stuff that CAG normally does, but they may be doing this specific thing that we ask them to as well. The one thing that would be new is the community resiliency piece, and we need to make sure we've got that scoped right, and we have the right people on that, and I think that would probably be some of the discussion about the makeup of the steering committee anyway. I'm not uncomfortable with adding one more committee in the mix. And the Prepare for Future COVID-19 Waves, that actually sounds a lot like emergency preparedness that staff takes on anyway. I'm not sure that we actually need a lot of community input separate from what we've got. Anyway, I've been listening to my colleagues through this, and I remain uncomfortable with what's being proposed.
I'll just add in a comment that, it's been made earlier, but I think, you know, with staff's experience in this area, I do, that is important to me in terms of the recommendation that's being put forward. A concern of mine is, while I appreciate some of the concerns that colleagues have raised with the particulars of this proposal, and I think there's two aspects to being discussed here. One is whether or not there should be a task force. We haven't got yet to a makeup because we haven't agreed that on a task force yet. But the second is in terms of the reporting structure. So I think council needs to make a decision on the concept of a task force. If it agrees or disagrees, if it chooses to agree with the task force, we would then have discussion with regards to the appropriate reporting structure, and we would have appropriate discussion with regards to terms of reference, which is not a motion before us. But I guess where I'm uncomfortable is where we actually go without a task force. And knowing the number of groups that we have in our community, we know how diverse our community is, both on the economic and on the cultural side. And that while we provide a small grant to CEAG that pays part of the executive director's salary for chairing the CEAG committee, that by no means gives council the prerogative to be referring things and expecting reports back or from the CEAG committee. That is not the arrangement between the town and the BIA with regards to CEAG. And again, so even if we thought it was efficient to try to work with CEAG on the cultural side, that the EAC would fill the economic side. If I understand the remarks I've heard correctly, we'd actually be forming a third committee for the community resiliency, and that would still leave, whether we leave it in that group or another process to prepare for future COVID-19 waves. So quite frankly, some of the comments I've heard with regards to the council, the policy group being the steering committee, our group is as a policy group to be doing the work that I would envision the EAC to be doing, that this steering committee would be doing, is not the work that I would see a council doing. While we may have an interest in that, I don't believe it's our job to be sitting and coming up with 50 recommendations and assessing them and that sort of thing. I think we need the expertise from Beacon Community Services, from the other organizations that are represented in this task force to bring the information. And for us to sit in council chamber and listen to 15 different community organizations over different periods of time and then try to balance priorities, I think is very inefficient. So I would like to hear more about if the task force is not the will of the majority of my colleagues, that we actually give some careful consideration to the way forward in an efficient manner. And I have to say, we have appreciated in the past, whether it be former committees or a committee like CEAG, the number one thing CEAG has come back to say after they formed is the advantages they have to the synergy of that group getting together. And so I saw the opportunity of synergy when you bring these suggested groups in the terms of reference together, that there would actually be a synergy that we would not see if groups were coming individually to present to council. So we do have two recommendations on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me, and I thank my council colleagues for all the perspective that has been provided, and I came into this concerned primarily about the efficiency and respect for volunteerism and the time that these busy people who have their own lives, their own businesses to run are contributing. And I think where I am is I'm comfortable with the structure that's suggested here because of, if you will, the discipline and the clarity it will provide in process. And that includes the role of the recovery director, who I don't see as being a filter, but as I see as providing structure to the policy group in terms of how that information is presented. I don't know, as the mayor's pointed out, that council deliberating as a policy group over a myriad of suggestions and ideas and looking to filter them through in this forum is necessarily the most efficient. I understand it's our responsibility to find the path forward, and this is the resource in my mind to help us get there. So I'm happy to support the motions that are on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, another filtering process that takes place, quite frankly, is during budget process. Staff in their various professional departments prepare the budget. We don't listen as a council to every option that those departments have considered when they put their budget together. Yes, we still have decisions to make on priorities that are presented to us, but there's a process that goes into the preparation of the budget before it comes to council. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. Just one last comment. I think we've heard really clearly that there is a concern to working with this efficiently. I mean, not just this program, any other program we do in the town, and a recognition that we're going to have staff who are challenged with the amount of time they have available, simply because we're going into the summer hiatus, and we've also got an extra job this year with this particular task force. So I just want to make sure that we're doing things in the most efficient way possible for our community, and also for ourselves as a corporation, as a business, the town. And then ultimately also for council, because we're the ones who are going to have to go through the information that's coming forward and working with our community. So I'll support the recommendations, but I really want that to be the focus, that we're trying to be, and I'm not suggesting that it isn't, but that the effort is, let's not duplicate things, but make sure that we get what we need in the most efficient manner possible. Thank you.
I'll turn to thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. So, I think efficiency is important, but having a good plan and implementing a good plan is actually, to me, a much higher priority than being efficient. And I guess I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. Like, the mission is not to be efficient. The mission is to come up with a good recovery plan and implement it well. And I guess, we've had, I think, a good discussion, and it sounds like there are two options that are being considered, and one of them is articulated reasonably well in the report, and the other one is strictly being verbal. And it would be nice to actually see the two options articulated well, and then make the decision about them. So I have a concern that we're trying to be too efficient and make the decision tonight without seeing what the second option looks like, laid out properly.
Thank you, Councillor, for those comments, but I'm not sure. And again, I agree with you that effectiveness or the plan is paramount. In getting to the most effective a plan, if you will, or actions, you want to be efficient in doing that. So effectiveness is certainly key, but efficiency is important as well. But in terms of a detail of a second plan, is your expectation? I'm sorry, I haven't heard enough about what. From my colleagues, what that would be. Are you suggesting staff should be preparing this, or? Where is this second plan arise? How is this second plan arising?
If you're asking me to answer that, we haven't had clarity of what the second option looks like, but we've had quite a bit of discussion, so I am getting a feel for what it would look like. The thing is, we're being presented with a take it or leave it option. We have some members have been expressing concerns about the structure that's being presented. There have been suggestions of what an alternative might look like. The question of who puts that alternative on the table, well, I'm sure that we could find a way for someone to do it, but like I say, a concern I have at the moment is this is a take it or leave it. And that's not a good way to make decisions.
Councillor Duncan, you want to speak next, and then I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm prepared to support the motion that's on the table, if only because I'm somewhat agnostic about how important it is or how possible it is for us to come up with a good plan now for long-term or medium-term or anything that happens 3 months longer from now, simply because we don't actually know. We don't even know if there will be a second wave. We haven't even begun to figure out what the full economic and geopolitical stability and energy supply ramifications of the first wave is. And it doesn't even look like the first wave has peaked in the United States. So I'm worried about getting really overly focused on how well our initial planning for something is going to go when, I guess to use Mr. Treleaven's metaphor, we're going to try and jolt a patient out of their coma, but we don't even know if he's 10 stories up in above the road inside a building in the middle of a forest. We don't know where that patient's going to wake up. So I trust that staff is wanting to use the tools that they have available, what plans have been provided up to this time to deal with emergencies that is familiar to them and to the structure that the province is using, because otherwise we don't really know what we're doing going forward. And I'm also thinking about how we're still talking about this as though this is going to be kind of a shorter term task force that will be operating for a few months or maybe a few years. But I'm thinking of the fact that we also declared a climate emergency towards the beginning of our term, and we've not addressed that at all. And so in theory, we've been in emergency or have declared being in some sort of an emergency for over a year now. And I think that over the next few months, we're going to see the compounding effects of that emergency with the COVID emergency. And so the likelihood that we will ever really be leaving an emergency footing seems increasingly unlikely to me. So I'm okay with going forward with the best guess that we have for now, and knowing that probably 6 months from now, there's a really good chance we're going to be sitting here again and saying, wow, this was unprecedented. We had no idea that things were going to shake out this way, and knowing we need to pivot again. And I don't want to spend a lot of time making staff come up with a really airtight plan for something that we don't know is what we're going to be dealing with. So I'd rather move this motion tonight, talk about the composition of our task force, and know that later on we might need to change our structure and have something more similar to what Councillor O'Keefe has kind of brought up about a task force that maybe reports to the policy group and the recovery director being more integrated into the regular flow of things with the CAO. And perhaps that would simply shake out as we go, as we realize that our regular operations, this is what our new normal is going to be, and that will be what some of our new new operations are, but I'm prepared to move forward with this for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Before going to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Duncan, or Councillor Garnett, I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the discussion this evening, and understand it's a challenging topic. I think council might be getting a little bit hung up with respect to the actual reporting structure, whether it's the recovery, the steering committee reporting to the recovery director reporting to council. I mean, with respect to the recovery director reporting to the chief administrative officer reporting to the policy group, from my perspective, that's fine. I think, though, that the details associated with the community organization involvement, in my mind, this is what we've heard from council from the get-go about the involvement, wanting the involvement of the community organizations as part of this process. And indeed, we see this, and that's why we're recommending this, is because of its comprehensive nature and the fact that there are limited resources, and that we look to the value of our community organizations to be able to undertake some of these things, because quite frankly, we are going to be moving towards closing the EOC and moving into the recovery stage. Ms. Verhagen, as the recovery director, will be going 0.5. So right now, she's basically focused full-time as the recovery director. But we do have a little thing called the OCP review being undertaken right now. Corey has been taking up a significant portion of Allison's work in current planning, etc., and that's been working fine. And he can handle that at a 0.5 position. So we have to move towards some recovery structure that is going to involve external resources. And that doesn't mean involving consultants, etc., because there's a time frame for bringing those consultants up to speed. And again, we value the diverse community organizations that we have. In terms of coming up with other options, Councillor Wainwright mentioned the idea of having a larger proportion of council as part of an overall steering committee. Well, that's our standing committee structure, which involves up to a minimum of 50% of council and the involvement of a level of community organization. If that's the direction that council would like to go as a potential task force, that's an option for council to consider. We can certainly go back at a staff level and spend the time preparing other options, etc. But as Mr. Trelevin pointed out clearly, there is no playbook for this. There's no ironclad sort of way forward. So I think, quite frankly, council needs to consider the options, and I think, you know, everyone's expressed the time-sensitive nature of this and the need to make a decision. So that's why this was brought forward in the manner in which it was.
Just a point for clarification that my colleagues may be aware of is that we did consider in discussion, myself and Mr. Humble, we did consider a standing committee versus a select committee. And as Mr. Humble has indicated, our standing committee procedures are that that the mayor actually appoints the citizen representatives, or can appoint the citizen representatives to the committee, but at least 50% of the committee must be made up of council members. So it's by virtue of that, it's generally a smaller committee. So we could not have a committee this size with representation for the various groups, even if the entire council sat on it, because it wouldn't make up the component size. So I just wanted to bring to council's attention that was given some consideration, but not a fully fleshed out option, as Councillor Wainwright has pointed out. On my speaking list, I'll now return to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I'm in moving forward at getting to Councillor Duncan's comment about, I'm not looking for an airtight plan. I'm looking for something that makes that makes sense for us, and also reflecting on Councillor Wainwright's comment about that we should have a structure in place that is closer to how we normally operate. And so how I see this unfolding is that a lot of these things are probably things that we should be incorporating into our strategic plan that we talked about revising sooner rather than later. So that's, you know, why I favor something different from what we've got here. I find it, yeah, overly bureaucratic, bogged down with process, and I think there's a better way to go about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to speak to the point about if we have this committee and length of time. I noted in terms of reference, it's they would terminate on December 31st of this year, but we could extend them by resolution of council. So if I may, a question to staff. If there is a concern about burnout among people being on these various committees, is it within the parameters that they can swap out people? Like we can have different people take turns so that it's not the same person that's being overwhelmed by having to be on the committee for a great length of time?
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, I think that's a discussion at the terms of, you know, for the terms of reference. I think that's certainly a possibility if it extends, and if there's if council wants to consider that, I think that's possible for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, focusing on the motion that's actually on the table, the first part says, talks about merit in adopting the recovery structure, which will report directly to the policy group. And the second one talks about a select committee to support, inform, and assist the recovery director, etc. So the reporting structure that we're having some concerns about is embedded in the motions. The motions that are in front of us are not simply, do we see merit in having a task force steering committee? The motions that are in front of us are kind of a whole ball of wax. So if we want to just deal with the question of do we want to have a steering committee / task force, that probably should be a different motion than what's on the table.
I concur, Councillor Wainwright, and thank you for raising that. And I would, hearing the discussion that I've heard with regards to reporting structure, I might suggest and leave it open to council that we actually withdraw the two recommendations, and because it does speak to that particular structure. I'm not seeing a simple amendment to that. Maybe my colleagues do, but it could be a single, simpler resolution with regards to creation of a task force, and then in subsequent resolutions we could speak to the reporting structure and the terms of reference.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Mayor, as the mover, it's my understanding procedurally that if this were to fail, there is nothing preventing another councillor to put forward another suggested motion, in that the recovery task force, isn't directly that discussion isn't directly affected necessarily, and so I think I like the structure that's suggested here. As I noted, I think that's the thing that I like about it is the structure it's providing and outlining for us. So I'm happy to see council. We've been talking about it and asking questions based on this. I'm quite comfortable seeing us vote on this motion, and if it were to fail, then we could look to alternatives.
Sorry, just for clarification, Councillor, in terms of supporting that the committee, task force steering committee report directly to the recovery director.
Yeah, we heard from staff that that the recovery director is going to bring that to the policy group, and my comment was I think we need that structure, not as a filter. The expectation in my mind is that the staff member is a professional in this area and going to bring us, the relevant, appropriate information the policy group needs to move forward. And it's that structure. I don't subscribe to seeing the policy group try and navigate and sift through everything that's coming in without that professional support. The structure gives us that. So yes, I'm comfortable with the motion on the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had no further speakers. So we still have the two motions on the floor worded as they are. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have two opposed, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. And so we're left with a third recommendation from staff with regards to the terms of reference, and I would suggest a motion before discussing those terms of reference.
I'll move the motion that the terms of reference for the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force be approved.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Wainwright?
So looking at the staff report and the second paragraph under the financial implications, it's saying that it's not clear where the funding to undertake the various initiatives is going to come from. Obviously there might be funding from the province, from the federal government. What it's suggesting here is if there are projects that require funding, those will be brought forward to council's review. And it's kind of implying that if there's external funding for it, that it's not going to come up to the policy group because it doesn't need the financial input. It doesn't need a funding decision. Could I get a bit of clarity about how much is being delegated to the steering committee?
Good questions, Councillor. Through to staff.
Through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, really much of this is unknown. I would expect that any financial decisions would be brought through the policy group, and I would assume that they would be enthusiastic that the province or the federal government would be willing to fund some or all of any recovery measures. But if it's implied that certain recovery funding initiatives from senior levels of government would not be brought forth to council, that's not the case. All of those would be brought before the policy group for discussion prior to being implemented.
Thank you. Did you wish to continue, Councillor Wainwright?
No, that answered that particular question.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So it's still unclear to me where EAC is going to fit in with all of this. So council has already asked them to come up with recommendations, etc. So I presume that they will still report directly to council on whatever they come up with. And then they're also going to go to the steering committee to do the same thing. Is that correct?
So to answer the question, yes. As per our referral, that referral would maintain to the EAC, and as per that the terms of reference of the EAC would report back directly to council. I might mention that the EAC does have a meeting scheduled this Friday. I think given the resolutions that we're deliberating on this evening, that those could be brought forward to the EAC, and certainly discussion at the EAC could ensue. But that would be the framework unless we motion otherwise this evening.
Okay, so they'll still have that opportunity. Also, in the terms of reference, were we going to discuss membership now or under the terms of reference?
Yes, this would be the time.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess a few comments on that. So it mentions SIP, member of South Island Prosperity Project. I think it's good for us to be having some communication with them, but I didn't necessarily see them being a regular a voting member on our committee. I think the more important thing for us to be talking about in regards to SIP is I see EAC playing a role there in terms of helping to identify ways that SIP can support us, how we can leverage what SIP is doing in their recovery efforts. So I don't necessarily see them, that's one that I would sort of strike off of the list. Also getting to points that were previously mentioned, I don't see any representation, say from groups that would represent children's and families. So whether there's any consideration for that, should we be including perhaps the school district? Or there are other organizations that we should be including to be more inclusive?
Beacon Community Services as a broader organization does provide a number of family services. The particular representative is responsible for the Shoal Center, which are senior programs, but there would indirectly be some representation, but I acknowledge your good point. And so you may, are you wishing to hear from your colleagues, Councillor?
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of throwing that out in terms of my thoughts on the members, but I would like to hear from the others as well.
Sure, it would take an amendment to change. Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillor O'Keefe. Good to hear the role of the EAC and the mayor's summation there. Certainly that's my expectation. The EAC has some broad sector representation that we don't necessarily see here in the voting membership that they're going to bring into this discussion. So they continue obviously to be very relevant and providing input directly to council policy group. So I'm pleased with that expectation aligning to others. I also concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comment, and that's two in a row, that that SIP perhaps shouldn't be here as a voting member, and I think they've got valuable insight, valuable exposure from a regional perspective that we could certainly get some insight from. But an amendment there quite possibly could be to shift SIP to a non-voting member status within the terms of reference. Not a motion to amend at this point, just a suggestion to hear what other colleagues may think about that. And then a comment is we've got some broad representation, certainly from Chamber and SBIA representing a multitude of certainly business interests. And I'm curious, don't know if it's a question to staff in terms of the consideration of how the list was formulated, but we do have a fairly active group, very keen on sort of the retail environment, that have offered some insight, certainly from time to time, and strong interest in this area, supporting our Sydney by and large a group of retailers and others, and whether or not they should also have an opportunity to send a member to participate in the same vein, perhaps where we're offering that opportunity to the community association. So again, I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor, to see if they resonate with anyone else on council. Thank you.
Thank you. And with the two, I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright next, but with regards to SIP, quite frankly, while I'm a Peninsula representative to SIP on the regional task force, I simply don't know whether SIP would have the resource to actually participate, but I acknowledge the point with regards to it being an external body having a vote. And I do know that, having had conversation with the interim chair of EAC, that he certainly wishes to engage SIP through their processes, and I would favor either option of SIP being a non-voting member on this committee, or striking them from this committee and leaving them to have a relationship directly with the EAC. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll concur with my colleagues. I would prefer not to see SIP being a voting member. I appreciate they may, it would be useful to have a liaison. I'm sure they can provide useful input and advice, but I see that more as observer, advisor, and not a voting member. I confess I also had a little bit of concern about the community representation aspect. Like, I think we've got good representation from the economic sector. There's pretty good representation from the cultural sector as well. But when we're looking at kind of the community resiliency piece and the broad, the non-economic, non-cultural, let's say, I'm not really comfortable with the Sydney Community Association being the representative for that. And I'm also not thinking that simply expanding it by adding somebody from SOS will do it either. Both of those are somewhat politically active advocacy type organizations. We do have organizations that have long history in the community of and of actively doing stuff for the community, and I'm thinking like Rotary and the Lions. They, you know, they're pretty broad representation, but one of the benefits of having groups like that is they actually take on tasks and do them. Like, that's something they've got a history of doing. I share Councillor Duncan's concerns that food security is probably going to be one of the key elements of thinking about resiliency for the future, and not really seeing that represented anywhere. So I don't have a specific proposal to make, but I think our membership is missing something in that area broadly, and I don't think we're going to solve it by adding SOS to the mix.
Thank you, Councillor. May I suggest to colleagues, if there is another speaker, I'll certainly proceed, but we've mentioned at least 3, if not 4, different points and possible amendments, and my suggestion is that we proceed with them one at a time for clarity. So we can continue discussion after that, but we've had comments from a number of members with regards to SIP, and
I'll move that SIP be removed as a voting member and added to the non-voting list.
Second.
Further discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. In regards to additional membership and getting back to youth, children, families, I'm wondering about appointing asking the school trustee for School District 63 for Sydney to be a member, to bring in that aspect. I'll move that. I'll move that we add the SD 63 school trustee for Sydney to the list of voting members.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion. Councillor Duncan.
Thanks. I was thinking that a school district representative would be good as well, though I'm not sure whether the trustee would be the appropriate person just because of the role they have, or if it would actually be somebody from the administration of the school itself. But I'm okay with that. I think we also need probably one from the Peninsula Connections for Early Childhood. They are sponsored by Beacon Community Services, but as the mayor's already stated, usually representatives would get from them are people affiliated with the Shoal Center, and they don't necessarily know quite as intimately what that group is doing, and that group will know what the child cares are saying and what the preschool age groups are doing. And I think that would cover off quite a lot of the family interest.
Councillor O'Keefe, to speak to a point?
Councillor Duncan brings up a good point about whether it needs to be the school trustee. So I would be willing to amend that to say just a representative from School District 63 and leave it to them to decide who would be the most appropriate to participate.
I'll agree with that.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Mayor. Could I just ask to clarify the intent of the motion? Is that a voting member or a non-voting member?
A voting.
Voting?
Yeah.
Voting.
Yeah, I mean, the school district covers an area much broader than just Sydney, but is certainly applicable directly to Sydney. It just come to mind in the discussion that, perhaps a principal, but the suggestion that we invite the school district to appoint an individual. They would first have to express interest to participate and then appoint. So we have that as an amendment on the floor. Is there any, Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm glad that the motion's been amended because we shouldn't be dealing with appointing a specific individual in an open session. So great, thanks for that. I guess I'm just being a little bit concerned about onesie twosie additions to the membership. I can see that it would help to have somebody representing families. I can also see some reason that we might, and particularly when we're dealing with the pandemic, it might benefit us to have some representation from the care facilities, and maybe Beacon Community Services does that. But I'm just saying, I think we should have that. I think that we should also consider having representation of the disabled accessibility interest as well. And I think we should maybe have a bit of discussion about what we need on the committee before we make a bunch of motions to add this one, add that one kind of thing. Because I do think we want to be careful we don't make the task force too big. If it gets up to 18 people, I think we've gone too far. I'm thinking there are a couple of things that are missing, and I'm also wondering what maybe we drop to make room for that, so we don't make the committee too big.
Thank you, Councillor, and that was a consideration of staff as I interacted with Mr. Humble in terms of the size of the committee. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillor Wainwright's comments. I think we want to keep a group size that's manageable, and we want to look to an expectation to have this this task force up and running very, very quickly. I don't believe the appointment of a representative from School District 63 fits that criteria, and I actually not sure that it would be appropriate that it be a voting member at any rate, and so I'm going to vote against the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the amendment with regards to a representative from School District 63. Having heard discussion amongst council, I similarly don't support that as necessarily the best representative to the committee. Any further discussion on that amendment? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 4 opposed. The motion is defeated. So we have had discussion about other possible representation. Councillor Wainwright just made a good point in terms of composition and size. I turn to council for further consideration of the members listed, or Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Mary Winspear Center, certainly pivotal in the community in terms of providing cultural and event conference space, certainly as a venue. I might suggest that under the current administration, the Mary Winspear Center's perspectives may well be represented through the SBIA as well as CIAG. And so with that in mind, and certainly no disrespect to the input from the Mary Winspear Center, I think their voice is at that table. I'm going to move that a member of the Mary Winspear Center be struck from the membership.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I agree as well. That was one that I had noted, that they're well represented by 2 other organizations. So I'm comfortable with supporting that motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor, I was just looking down for a moment. I did see Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. If we could go in that order.
Okay. So I'd like to move that we strike the Sydney Community Association and the Wasanich Leadership Council from the membership.
Do we have a seconder? Can I suggest, Councillor, that we do one at a time?
Okay. So I'll move that we strike the Sydney Community Association.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second for discussion.
We have a seconder. Discussion, Councillor Wainwright?
So my intent in doing this is to free up some space on the committee so that we can add representation for families, the long-term care, and the disabled accessibility. And I haven't figured out who those representatives are, but what I'm looking at doing is making room so that we can have that representation. It's not intended to be a slight to those organizations.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I'm happy with keeping the Sydney Community Association as members. They're one of to me they kind of cover off some of the gaps. The others representing economic interests, cultural interests. They're a broader based organization, so I'm happy to keep them in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I've been busily trying to add up also seats that we should, remove or add, or mostly remove to make room for others. And I'm wondering if rather than going organization by organization, what we should be doing is taking more of the sector-based approach that we'd taken even when we were coming up with the OCP committee. So if we had 12 voting members, I think we're down to 11, 10. But if we go back, have 12 is capped and actually just had it by sectors so that we have the 12 voting members, mayor and a member of council, but then 3 from economic groups, including 1 from the EOC, 2 from other groups, 3 from community organizations or community service organizations, 3 from other cultural or community groups, nonprofits, including representation from, well, I guess maybe I shouldn't specify nonprofits. So the care homes, family service groups, child and youth groups, those would fall under that. And then another group for food security. I have only 1 member there, but I feel like we have possibly other members that we could add. Because I'd also left room for the Wasanich Leadership Council, though Councillor Wainwright has moved to strike that. I would like to hear discussion about why he's moved to strike that one specifically, because that would have been our only Indigenous representation.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll leave the discussion on the last part to a separate discussion. I might turn to ask the question. Beacon Community Services, as I did indicate, and as I think all of council knows, is a very large organization with different representation. In discussing with staff, we thought of the Shoal Center, which is a separate entity, if you will, representing senior citizens. So it wasn't, we could leave it open to a representative from Beacon Community Services, and it might be somebody else. But I was thinking that, or we were thinking that the Shoal Center would represent the seniors, given that that's the largest mandate of the Shoal Center. So I just leave that for discussion, but we do have an amendment specifically with regards to the SCA. Personally, I think we can keep it at a reasonable size with the community association. It's an organization with representation from different parts of our community, but I will listen to other council members and Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I agree that the makeup of the group needs to be concise. I think what I like about keeping the SCA in there is because they're not focused to a specific demographic or a specific interest. It is a broad group representing everybody throughout Sydney, which would include families or the elderly or someone from the business community, etc. So I'm in favor of leaving them in for those reasons.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the amendment to remove the SCA. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 6 opposed. The motion is defeated. And did you wish to continue, Councillor Wainwright, with regards to Wasanish Leadership Council?
No, I'll let somebody else try.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I did like the discussion with regards to representative from disabilities. Access Awareness isn't a long-established organization in Sydney. I think it's at least a dozen years old. Perhaps we could look to a representative from that organization, unless there are council members have other ideas. Access Awareness? Sorry, through to staff, is that the correct name of?
Yeah,
Councillor
I believe maybe Councillor O'Keefe knows the official name, but I can't say definitively whether or not that's the correct name.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, as far as I know, that I think that's their, or maybe it's accessibility awareness. You know, I think it's a good idea to be able to include persons with disabilities. I'm just not sure whether that particular group, they don't have a lot of people on that committee who actually have disabilities. Their focus for the last several years has not been so much being an ongoing advocate, but as a group that organizes an event once a year. So I think it's a good idea. I guess without having any other group to draw on, I suppose it would be all right. I know that the person who leads that is also a member of the Shoal Center. So whether somebody from the Shoal Center could be double-hatted to handle persons with disabilities as well as the seniors population, that might be another option.
Thank you, Councillor. I might turn to staff for just a moment, and if you could confirm the list of what is on the committee at the moment, remaining on the committee.
At the moment.
So we have a representative from EAC, a representative from the Chamber, representative from the BIA, 3 economic organizations, a representative from SEAG, a representative from the SCA, representative from Beacon Community Services, representation from APC, and Wasanish Leadership Council.
That's correct.
So that is 8 before the mayor and council liaison. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to sort of piggyback on Councillor Duncan and Councillor Wainwright's food security, relying on your expertise, Councillor Duncan, is there an organization that you would like to put forward as to be a member of this committee for food security?
Again, my concern would be whether or not if we ask these people, they would come up with a member for us. But I would probably say that the Capital Regional District, the Capital Region Food and Agricultural Initiatives Roundtable would be probably the first group to go to, and have them put forward somebody. It'd be, yeah, no, that's the best group for the urban area. The other one would be possibly the Saanich Peninsula Agricultural Commission. But they would be dealing more with agricultural land. So I think CR Fair is our best bet if they have somebody who would be willing to stand for that.
If I might comment before turning to Councillor O'Keefe, that while I respect the work that CFAIR does, I would put them in the same category as SIP, that they're a regional organization largely external to Sydney, and would see them as a non-voting member on the committee. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. So just an idea I'm tossing out there and percolating on, as I like to percolate. I think the important thing is getting input from these different groups. And so whether they actually have to be on the committee, which puts demands on their time to be involved in developing strategies and tasks and that sort of thing. And so I'm wondering whether an option for some of these things, like perhaps persons with disabilities or food security issues, or some reference was made specifically to the retail sector, instead of having a standing member on that committee, whether we can just direct the committee to seek feedback from those specific organizations on their thoughts and to incorporate that into their recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. My comment would be I would be supportive of that. I'll turn to my colleagues.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, yes, I'd certainly be supportive if there are some smaller groups where we think there'd be some valued insight from those groups, and that I assume Councillor O'Keefe would move some sort of amendment somewhere within the terms of reference to make that inclusive of the terms of reference for the task force.
If I might turn to staff, Mr. Humble, might you see in the place in the terms of reference where it'd be appropriate to, but I think it's within the scope of the terms of reference that the committee can certainly turn to external resources to invite presentations or information.
Yeah, if I can, Mr. Mayor, so if you look at the various pillars or sections, focus sections, it does indicate opportunities for seeking resources, I believe.
Okay, so I think we have that covered off in the terms. Thank you. Okay, so that doesn't require a motion. So we have no motions on the floor. We do have the main motion with regards to the terms of reference. We have amended them. Further discussion?
Thank you. To pick up what was suggested previously, and for the purpose of discussion, I'll move that we remove voting member of the Wasonic Leadership Council.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe?
I'll second.
For discussion, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. And I think in part, really the opportunity to provide some context in that we've got a number of, neighboring councils who I think those communities rely on Sydney as their front door, as their shopping center, as their service center for provision of, be it medical, dental, health services, etc. And so, the need perhaps to cast the net wider, unless the logic for Wasonic Leadership Council is somewhat different than the assumption I've just made. So maybe a question through to yourself, Mr. Mayor, to staff.
No, I concur in what you're saying, and quite frankly, we did get some consideration to representation from North Saanich or Central Saanich, but again, there was consideration of the external aspect to those organizations. Not that we didn't have the opportunity to consult with them with the existing terms, and we could certainly do that. The existing terms would certainly leave us open to consult with Saanich Leadership Council as we would with any other external organization. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in supportive of this, of the motion, because what I've learned in sitting in on a number of these urban reconciliation dialogue sessions is the pressure that there is amongst First Nations in the area to get involved in different things and to be consulted. And while they appreciate, it seems, the sentiment, I don't know that that this is something that they would have the capacity to participate in terms of time and dealing with what's going on with them. I sort of see this as it's important that we consult with them on this, but whether they actually need to be a voting member, I'm not sure.
And I just should comment that this isn't a sole reason for supporting the motion, but there is within the SIP structure a separate Indigenous economic subcommittee that is very well represented and dealing with nations across the region. All nations are now in the South Island are a part of SIP. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. So we now have 7 community representatives, 7 voting community representatives and one non-voting representative. Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan, we do still have the main motion on the floor. Councillor Duncan?
I'm sorry, can you go, the main motion is simply to approve the whole terms of reference as it is, or was there still another member that was specifically being discussed?
We had no other discussion on the floor, so the motion is to adopt the terms of reference, and in this case would be as amended.
As amended? Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to circle back to Councillor O'Keefe's initial recommendation to have somebody on there with more of the family representation, because as has been noted a couple times, their Beacon Community Services person is usually Shoal Center, which is representing seniors. So I would move that we'd add as a voting member somebody from the Peninsula Connections for Early Childhood.
I'll second.
Second. Do you wish to comment further, motivate further, Councillor Duncan?
I don't think they're a broad coalition, so we wouldn't know necessarily who we would get. Hopefully, they would be somebody, ideally somebody local. And while it might be somebody else from Beacon Community Services, I think that it's important to actually make sure that they're going to be somebody who specifically knows about what that group is doing, because not necessarily everyone from Beacon Community Services will. So even if it does end up being someone else from that group, I think having that as their specific role from that committee is going to be important.
Are they an organization across the region?
The Peninsula.
Peninsula, thank you. Yeah. Further discussion? Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm turning away from the list of members to the rest of the terms of reference. And maybe this is not the time to do that. Maybe you want to finish with the membership part, but I do want to propose some amendments to other parts of the term of reference.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor. So we do have the motion moved and seconded to amend to add a voting member, Councillor Duncan, as I recall. Further discussion? Okay, further discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. I'm just wondering whether we think the west side of Sydney is well represented, the industrial sector. I know that they were previously represented by the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, but they aren't any longer. And I can't recall whether there's a seat on the EAC for them. So I think it's an important part of our economy that often gets left out. So I just, want to make sure. I mean, we've got, the downtown area is covered off in spades with CAG and SBIA.
CAG is in the entire community, but to your point, the West Sydney business is well represented in the chamber membership, very well represented in the chamber membership. I mean, the separate advocacy group that was, West Sydney, no longer has that specific, no longer has a specific advocacy role. It's folded within the chamber. So personally, I do think there's adequate representation there.
Okay.
Councillor Rintoul?
And if I may, just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, within the EAC, there are also members from West Sydney and Triton Boats, or excuse me, Titan Boats certainly come to mind as being one of the participants there, and also others from the marine sector in general.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, seeing no other discussion with regards to organizations, Councillor Wainwright, did you wish to proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm looking at the Section 2 purpose, and the first line says the task force reporting to council and recovery director. And we've already had some discussion about reporting structure and so on. I would propose that we amend that by just striking out and recovery director to make it clear that they're reporting to council.
I second that.
Okay, we passed an earlier motion. The first and second parts of motions that we passed this evening was in support of the reporting structure as presented by staff. So we would now be changing that.
That isn't my understanding of the discussion we had earlier, but the precise wording of the motions that were adopted might be interpreted that way.
Okay, well, we did have councillors speak directly to that point, but we do have it moved and seconded, and I will open it to further discussion. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The current language here, I think, covers all bases in terms of the context of this discussion, in that it notes the task force's reporting to council and the recovery director, and I think that is in keeping with council's intent as policy group to have that very direct liaison, and B, in keeping with the original motions that were adopted by council to have that recovery director in that professional capacity involved as part of the process. So I'm happy with the wording as it is, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay, so we have the motion on the floor is to amend, to remove a recovery director from that first line. Again, I'm supportive. I'll echo Councillor Rintoul's comments, and I'm supportive of it remaining. But look for other discussion. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I think when I look at the chart and the way our discussion went earlier, it was whether or not the task force should be reporting directly to council rather than through the recovery director, who is essentially reporting to us. And so I believe the way Councillor Wainwright has phrased the motion, that it's, the recovery director is the head of this task force now reporting to council rather than having them go the two ways, which our earlier discussions sounds like that was actually the second option that was not well flushed out, was the possibility of having a committee reporting directly to the policy group and rather than the recovery director. And so as currently phrased, it maybe should have been to council through the recovery director.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the main motions, point 1 and 2 that we passed. That was with the recovery structure in Appendix A, presented as a part of that report, and so that's what I see as council having accepted in passing those resolutions. So again, we're now looking to change what we passed in a previous resolution. Councillor Duncan?
No, sorry, I feel, I had thought that the intention was actually to clarify that our previous motion was keeping that recovery structure as in Appendix A, where the Recovery Steering Committee reports to the recovery director, which reports to the policy group. And that, as currently phrased, without Councillor Wainwright's amendment, they're reporting to both. So I thought he was making it actually consistent with the motion as we moved earlier.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying now. I'll turn to staff if they wish to comment. I'm just asking if you, with regards to that first sentence and the task force, reporting to council and recovering director.
Yeah, I can see thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see the concern or confusion that Councillor Duncan's raising with respect to it, because the way it reads right now, the purpose of the task force reporting to council and the recovery director, again, it's not quite consistent with respect to the flow chart in Appendix A, and so it should potentially read the task force reporting to council through the recovery director. And I think that would be more consistent. So I would support the suggestion that Councillor Duncan is making.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. However, we do have a motion on the floor to remove recovery director from that statement, that sentence, which is moved and seconded and been spoken to. Sorry, Councillor Wainwright, do you wish to speak?
Well, I can see that we need to have this clear, and reporting through the recovery director, I could live with that. The way it sits right now, it does seem problematic.
I agree with you, Councillor, and would you move, would you?
So I'll, if council's agreeable, I'll withdraw that amendment, and instead I'll make the motion that we replace the word, the phrase "and recovery director" with "through the recovery director."
Thank you. Does the seconder agree to the removal of the first motion and subsequent motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you for raising that, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I had a second one, and it's in the second line of purpose, where it says, so basically the task force will be responsible for considering, developing, and implementing programs. And I didn't anticipate that we were going to be making the task force, that we were looking at having them implement anything. It may be that some of the organizations that are on the task force might be implementing initiatives, but the task force as a whole to be implementing programs doesn't seem right. So perhaps through you to staff, is that actually what's intended? Or might it be appropriate to remove the "and implementing"?
I'll let staff go ahead, and I do have a comment as well. Mr. Mickelson.
Through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, the intent is to actually have the functional element groups on the bottom do the bulk and the majority of the work, supported by Ms. Verhagen and Ms. Barner, with assistance from the steering committee and perhaps other functional elements of town staff as needed. That's the original intent, and I would have Mr. Humble if he would like to add anything as well.
No, I would agree with Chief Mickelson. I think that is the overall intent.
Okay, I think to Councillor Wainwright, if this is, if I am interpreting your point correctly, I think there is a fine line to consider here in terms of the task force implementing versus members of the task force or the organizations implementing. But the comment I wanted to make was that, for example, previous versions of the Economic Advisory Group, and I'm sorry I don't remember their exact names in previous iterations, did implement the committee itself did implement specific programs or actions. Councillor Keefe?
Thank you. I had a similar concern about that. I didn't see the task force as having the primary responsibility of implementing programs. I saw them as an advisory body to come to council to say, here's what we think needs to be done. And council would look at that and say, yeah, okay, that should or shouldn't be done. Along with those recommendations would come cost implications, recommendations about who would do it. And it might be incidental that members of the task force would take things on, like the SBIA is already doing a shop local campaign, and the chamber might already be doing something. But to put it in their purpose to say that they are actually responsible for that, I'm not comfortable with that, and I think it should be removed.
Okay, we've had a couple of speakers, and I'd turn to council if they wish to make a motion or make an amendment.
So I beg your pardon, point of order, is there not a motion on the floor with respect to removing and implementing?
I don't believe we have that motion on the floor.
All right, then I will move that we remove the words "and implementing" from purpose.
Second.
Okay, just housekeeping to change it, will be responsible for considering and developing programs. So we're just taking out a comment and adding the word "and" in between considering and developing. while removing and implementing.
Correct.
And do we have a seconder?
Yep.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. Did you have further?
No, that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor. So we're back to our main motion, which is Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, thank you. I guess a question first through you to staff. One of the things that I'd like to see from these different groups, so from the economic and the cultural resource recovery and resiliency, some information to council on initiatives that are already taking place or underway by their respective organizations, to help us get an idea of how the recovery is already progressing and what is being done already. And so I'm wondering if staff feels that based on the wording that they have here under each of those 4 elements, whether they feel that that information would come to council, or whether we need to be a bit more explicit about that.
I have a comment, but I'll let Mr. Humble go first.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I think it's well covered under certainly at least the second bullets in both the economic and the cultural recovery component, that it's broad enough to cover that, and certainly given the fact that the mayor and a council liaison will be active on the committee, I think they can bring that forward to the committee as well.
Yeah, I think it would be a sort of natural function of the committee that the representative organizations would bring forward in their discussion what current or new initiatives they were taking at the time. Mr. Mickelson, Chief.
Yes. I would just add that, again, one of the strengths of our EOC to date was we've had recovery embedded in what we've done essentially since day one. And Ms. Barner and Ms. Verhagen will be very well versed in what existing initiatives are being taken by a number of community organizations. So that'll be a pretty easy deliverable to provide.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? So we're now on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 1 opposed. Councillor O'Keefe. Motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn back to the agenda. So we do have a motion to go in camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters relating to personal information pursuant to section 90.1A of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Just while council members are on the line here, I did note in the information that was sent out that there was a separate Zoom connect for the in-camera meeting, so we will be disconnecting and reconnecting. Okay, thank you, Councillor. We'll take a 5-minute recess and look forward to you rejoining. Thank you.
We have to adjourn first.
Oh, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.